You smell like mothballs and you're ruining the aesthetic for Brandon's investor brunch. If you die of pneumonia out here, at least it's cheaper than your heart meds. That was the last thing my mother said before she threw 2 black garbage bags onto my wet porch. I watched it happen on my security camera feed at 4:15 in the morning. My father, Daniel, had just dragged my 78-year-old grandmother out of his luxury SUV and left her on the freezing concrete in her slippers. He didn't help her stand. He just dropped her there like unwanted furniture. Then my mother, Marie, tossed those trash bags right next to her. They weren't full of garbage. They were full of her clothes. One of them split open, spilling a knitted cardigan straight into a puddle. I scrambled to the front door and threw it open, but I was too late. They hadn't knocked. They hadn't rung the doorbell. I just saw their tail lights fading into the mist as they sped away. I looked down. Grandma Eleanor was sitting on the edge of the porch, soaked and shivering. She didn't look up at me. She didn't cry. She just stared at the ground, looking terrifyingly calm. I gripped the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. All I felt was a rage so hot it could have dried the pavement. They didn't just dump her. They threw her away. Have you ever realized that the people supposed to love you most are actually the ones holding the knife? Tell me in the comments. What was the moment you knew you were done with your family? I pulled Grandma inside and got her onto my second-hand beige sofa. I wrapped her in the thickest blanket I owned, the one I usually saved for sick days. She was shivering so hard her teeth were clicking together, a sound that seemed painfully loud in the quiet apartment. While I boiled water for tea, I looked around my small living room. It was clean, modest, and paid for. Every bill here was paid on time by me. But for the last 10 years I hadn't just been paying my own bills. I had been the silent investor in the Henderson family facade. I remembered a Tuesday night 3 years ago. I was sitting at this exact kitchen table staring at a bowl of instant ramen because I had $40 left in my checking account. My father, Daniel, had called me in a panic. He needed $2,800 immediately or he would lose his office lease. He cried on the phone. He said he was doing it for the family legacy. I sent the money. I ate noodles for 3 weeks so he could keep his mahogany desk. At that exact same time, my brother Brandon was posting stories on Instagram from a yacht in Ibiza. He was holding a bottle of champagne that cost more than my rent. The caption read, "Self-made." I found out later that trip was funded by Grandma's pension checks, which my mother claimed were needed for emergency roof repairs. There was no roof repair. There was just Brandon needing to look rich to impress people who didn't care about him. That was the family economy. I was the safety net and Brandon was the trapeze artist who never bothered to learn how to catch himself. My parents, Daniel and Marie, were the ringmasters, obsessed with the show. They lived in a sprawling historic mansion on Queen and Hill that they couldn't afford to heat. They drove leased luxury cars they couldn't afford to insure. And right now, they were drowning in debt while planning a $100,000 vow renewal ceremony at the exclusive Seattle Yacht Club. It wasn't about love. It was a networking event. They needed to look successful to secure a loan from a visiting tech investor because Brandon's latest crypto startup had imploded. I handed Grandma a mug of tea. She took it with both hands, the steam rising around her face. She looked small, fragile. Why now? I whispered, mostly to myself. Why tonight? Then I remembered. Last week I'd gone over for dinner, a rare invitation. My mother was talking about renovations. Brandon wanted to start a business podcast. He needed a studio with soundproofing and high-end lighting. He wanted the downstairs suite. Grandma's suite. The cruelty wasn't an accident. It was a renovation decision. They didn't dump her because she was difficult. They dumped her because she was taking up square footage that Brandon wanted for his microphone. I looked at my grandmother, sipping tea in my living room while the rain lashed against the windows. They thought she was disposable. They thought I would just pick up the pieces like I always did quietly while they played rich at the yacht club. But looking at her shivering frame, something inside me snapped. I was done being the safety net. It was time to cut the ropes. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the Seattle sky a bruised, heavy gray. I didn't make coffee first. I didn't brush my teeth. I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and tapped the recurring transfers tab. Daniel Henderson office support, $2,800. My thumb hovered over the trash icon. For a second, a lifetime of conditioning kicked in. The fear that if I didn't pay, the family would crumble. Then I remembered the image of my grandmother in the rain. I tapped delete. Confirmed. I walked into the kitchen expecting to find a confused, broken old woman needing guidance. I expected to spend the morning explaining where she was, maybe making soft foods she could chew easily. Instead, Eleanor was sitting at my small kitchen table wearing my oversized robe. She wasn't hunched over. Her back was straight. Her eyes, usually clouded with what my mother called early onset fog, were sharp and clear. She was holding a pen she must have taken from my counter, tapping it rhythmically against the table. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a CEO waiting for a board meeting to start. "Did you cancel it?" she asked. Her voice didn't waver. It was the voice I remembered from my childhood, before she started fading. I froze. "Grandma. The transfer, Susan. Did you cancel the $2,800? I stared at her. "How do you know about that?" She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit down. We have work to do." I sat. The transformation was unsettling. It was like watching a statue come to life. Mom said you were confused. She said you were forgetting things. Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a sweet grandmotherly smile. It was cold. I let them think I was losing my mind, Susan. It's the oldest trick in the book. The possum strategy. You play dead to see who comes to eat the carcass. She reached into the pockets of the trash bag my mother had thrown at her the night before. She pulled out a battered, peeling red leather notebook. It looked ancient. When people think you're senile, she said, opening the book to a bookmarked page, they stop whispering. They have conversations right in front of you because they think you're just a piece of furniture. And they get careless. She slid the book across the table to me. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Handwriting tight, precise, and dating back 5 years. June 12th. Marie took $600 cash from my wallet. Told me she bought my heart medication. Pharmacy receipt shows she only paid a $40 copay. The rest went to Skin Spirit for Botox. Evidence. Credit card receipt found in trash. August 4th. Daniel forged my signature on the dividend check. $4,500. Told me the company didn't pay out this quarter. I called the broker. They paid. October 20th. Brandon stole my pearl earrings. Saw them on his girlfriend's Instagram 2 days later. Marie told me I lost them because I'm clumsy. Page after page. Dates. Amounts. Lies. It was a forensic accounting of their cruelty. I wasn't waiting to die, Susan, she said, her voice hard. I was building a case. You don't spring the trap when the rats are just sniffing around. You wait until they are fat, comfortable, and think they own the house. Then you snap the neck. I looked up at her, tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness but from shock. My parents thought they were discarding a burden. They had no idea they had just handed me the weapon that would destroy them. They cut my heart medication last week, she said, pointing to the last entry. To buy Brandon a watch for the renewal party. That was the line. I'm done playing possum. He tapped the book. Now let's look at the assets they think they own. The red book was just the map. Now I needed to see the territory. I opened my laptop and pulled up the security cloud. I replayed the footage from 4:15 this morning. Watching it the second time was different. I wasn't just seeing cruelty anymore. I was seeing arrogance. I turned up the volume on Marie's voice. If you die of pneumonia, cheaper than heart meds. I saved the clip. I backed it up to 3 different drives. That wasn't just a video. It was a confession. Then I logged into the joint bank account my father had access to. The one he thought contained Grandma's entire life savings. The balance blinked back at me. $8.12. He drained it yesterday, Eleanor said, watching over my shoulder. He thinks he cleaned me out. He thinks that $40,000 was everything I had. She reached into the neckline of her dress and pulled out a silver chain. Hanging from it was a small, heavy brass key. He took it off and pressed it into my palm. It was warm from her skin. Go to the First National downtown, she said. Safety deposit box 404. It's time you met the real landlord. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my coat and drove. The bank vault was quiet, smelling of dust and old money. When I turned the key and slid the long metal box out, I expected jewelry. Maybe some old bonds. Instead, I found a stack of thick legal documents bound in blue folders. I opened the first one. It was a commercial deed for a 12-story office building in downtown Seattle. The exact building where my father's consulting firm rented the entire top floor. The owner listed wasn't a faceless corporation. It was EH Properties LC. I opened the second folder. The deed to the Queen and mansion my parents lived in. The house they claimed was their legacy estate. Owner, H Properties LC. H. Eleanor Henderson. I sat down on the cold tile floor of the vault, surrounded by millions of dollars in real estate paper. My grandmother wasn't just a retiree with a pension. She was a tycoon. She owned the roof over their heads and the floor under their feet. I flipped to the correspondence file at the bottom of the box. There were letters from a property management firm addressed to Daniel Henderson. Notice of default, 3 months past due. Second notice, commercial lease violation. Final warning, eviction proceedings imminent. My father wasn't just a squatter in his personal life. He was a delinquent tenant in his professional life. He hadn't paid rent in 90 days. He was using that money to fund the vow renewal, gambling that he could schmooze an investor before the anonymous landlord locked him out. He had no idea that the anonymous landlord was the woman he had just dumped on a porch in the rain. I looked at the dates. The eviction notice was ready to be filed. All it needed was a signature. I packed the papers back into the box, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from the sheer weight of the ammunition I was holding. They thought they had discarded a burden. They had actually declared war on the bank. I drove home with a new understanding of the word power. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly in a safety deposit box, waiting for the rent to come due. When I got back to the apartment, Eleanor was standing by the window watching the rain. "Did you find it?" she asked without turning around. "I found everything," I said. "You own it all. The house. The office. You own them." She turned and her eyes were hard as flint. "And tomorrow night, Susan, I'm going to collect." The Seattle Yacht Club smells like old wood, rain, and desperate money. It was 7 in the evening and the parking lot was full of Teslas and Range Rovers. Inside, under the crystal chandeliers, my parents were throwing the party of the decade to celebrate 30 years of marriage. A marriage funded entirely by the woman they had left on a porch 36 hours ago. I sat in my car in the back lot watching the valet park a Bentley. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother, Marie. "We forgive you for being dramatic, Susan. You can come tonight if you apologize to your father, but don't bring her. We told everyone she's in a specialized memory care facility. It's better this way." I stared at the screen. "We forgive you." The audacity was almost impressive. They genuinely believed they had won. They thought they had successfully disposed of the problem, and could now focus on securing the loan from the tech investor Brandon was currently schmoozing at the open bar. I didn't type out a long, angry response. I didn't beg. I sent a single thumbs-up emoji. Then I got out of the car. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. I was wearing black slacks and a black polo shirt, blending in perfectly with the catering staff. I didn't go to the front entrance. I went to the service door around the back, flashing a clipboard at the busy event coordinator who assumed I was with the AV team. I wasn't there to eat cake. I was there to hijack the system. I slipped into the ballroom's control booth. It was dark, humming with the sound of servers and amplifiers. Below me the party was in full swing. I saw my father, Daniel, laughing loudly with a group of men in suits, holding a scotch glass that probably cost $50 a pour. He looked relaxed. Invincible. He looked like a man who owned the world. He had no idea his landlord was parked at the curb. I plugged my laptop into the projector's main HDMI port. Behind the stage, photos of my parents' perfect life cycled by. Vacations, cars, smiles. All bought with stolen money. The file was ready. The truth.mp4. I texted the contact saved as landlord. "I'm in. You're up." Outside in the rain, a black town car waited. Inside sat Eleanor Henderson, no longer in a housecoat, but in a vintage Chanel suit she'd kept for 20 years. Her hair was done lipstick red. On her lap rested 3 notarized eviction notices. She looked less like a grandmother and more like an executioner. From the booth, I watched Daniel step to the mic, smiling as the room fell silent. He was about to sell the lie one last time. 30 years of marriage, he began. Applause followed. My mother dabbed her eyes. Then Daniel lowered his voice. "Sadly, my mother couldn't be here. Her dementia has progressed. For her safety, we placed her in a luxury memory care facility." I nearly gagged. Luxury care. They meant my couch. I hit play. The lights died. Gasps filled the room. Then the screen lit up with Ring footage. 4:15 a.m., rain pounding as Daniel dragged his mother from the car. Trash bags flew. Marie's voice echoed through the ballroom. "If she dies of pneumonia, it's cheaper than her meds." Silence. Absolute. The audio followed. "Once the old hag dies, the insurance covers the catering." Someone screamed. The doors burst open. Eleanor walked in, flanked by 2 King County sheriffs and her lawyer. She moved down the aisle as the crowd parted. Daniel stared frozen. She took the mic from his hand. "I am not in a home, Daniel. I am the sole owner of EH Properties LC, your landlord." She faced the crowd. "Tonight isn't a celebration. It's an eviction." The lawyer handed Daniel the papers. His office, assets, and accounts had already been seized. He was bankrupt. Trespassing. Brandon tried to slip away. A sheriff stopped him with a notice. Marie collapsed theatrically. No one caught her. I walked down the aisle and stopped in front of my parents. "You paid for this," my father whispered. "You always wanted me to pay for everything," I said. "I finally did." Eleanor took my arm and we left together as the room buzzed with ruin behind us. The fallout was swift. My parents were evicted within 24 hours. carrying trash bags of their own. Friends vanished. Daniel and Marie ended up in a motel. Brandon became a barista. 2 months later, rain fell over Seattle as I watched from a penthouse overlooking Puget Sound. Eleanor sat beside me, calm and unbroken. "We didn't lose a family," she said softly. "We evicted tenants who refused to pay their rent."